The indigent defense crisis spans both the federal and state governments, particularly given the economic crisis that we're in. What you're seeing is that state budgets are being slashed. We've gone beyond cutting the fat to cutting sort of the muscle and the bones of state budgets. And when you're talking about poor people who are involved in the criminal justice system, these people have no political power and no influence, and so they're very likely to be sort of on the chopping block. What's happening is that criminal defendants who have a right to counsel are not being given that right effectively because their attorneys are overworked. Too often attorneys have caseloads that are crushing them. They're not able to really investigate their clients' specific defenses, and so what ends up happening is that they sort of get the best that they can for their client, whether that's a plea that results in jail time and all the consequences that are involved in jail time, when if they'd had the resources they may have been able to get an acquittal. What we've seen is several sort of proposals that would help to increase the effectiveness of the indigent defense system both at the federal and the state level. One of the most promising things is the giving the Department of Justice the power, which it currently lacks, to hold states accountable for their failure to meet their Sixth Amendment right to provide counsel to indigent defendants. Allowing the DOJ to become active in that area and to work with the states one-on-one to develop systems that work for those states and also work to achieve, the constitutional guarantees is a really positive step. Another positive reform that's being discussed is increased transparency in the funding for criminal justice programs at the state level. The federal government spends billions of dollars every year to support state criminal justice systems. Unfortunately, the reporting requirements for those funds is not as stringent as it could be, and it's hard for the federal government to evaluate how states are spending that money and whether they're spending it effectively to support all components of the criminal justice system, including indigent defense. Because, as I said, if all of the components of the system aren't working, then none of them will ultimately work. You risk failure of the entire system. And so increasing transparency and accountability for the way in which federal funds are spent, both in law enforcement and prosecution and indigent defense, is extremely helpful in helping to improve the system as a whole.
Unfortunately, what has happened with the juvenile justice system is that that system is broken. And one of the challenges is that we put young people who may have just had a momentary lapse in judgment into these really egregious conditions in juvenile facilities, in adult jails and prisons, and this makes them worse. We have the unintended consequence of our system basically has the unintended consequence of increasing and not decreasing crime. Juvenile facilities and adult facilities are very dangerous places for young people. These are places that young people really should not be in. We really need to be taking a look at the conditions of people in these facilities. One of our goals is to really increase and to improve the conditions in juvenile facilities and make it so that staff are not able to use dangerous practices such as pepper spray, hog-tying youth, putting youth in restraints, putting youth in very dangerous positions where they might break bones, they might compromise their development for the rest of their lives. We really see the need for basically 4 major changes to the juvenile justice system. First, we want to make sure that we're preventing crime and making sure that young people who don't need to be in the justice system aren't there. So we know that a lot of young people who have mental health problems or who might have school-related problems, these are young people that are ending up in the justice system who really should be handled differently. The second thing that we really need to be concerned about is kids who are tried in the adult criminal justice system. We want to remove young people from adult jails and prisons. We believe that these young people should be better cared for in juvenile facilities. And the third thing that we want to do is really increase the safety of kids who are held in juvenile facilities. And once they leave the juvenile facilities, we want to make sure that they are re-enrolled in school or get connected to jobs. So what we want to do is really see a fundamental reform of our justice system so that we're making sure that the young people who really don't need, who are not the serious youth who really need the intensive services the justice system should provide, we want to make sure that those young people are out of the system, and the kids who actually do need to be held in incarceration facilities, that those kids are getting the kinds of services that they really need.
Right now, our criminal justice system it's filled, I guess is the best way to say it. 1 out of every 31 people is somewhere within the criminal justice system. We have over 2.3 million people in our federal, state, and local prisons, over 210,000 in our federal prisons. That number represents a huge increase over the past 2 decades, multiple times. It's also the largest number of people per capita incarcerated worldwide. There are too many people serving too long. To what end? Are we safer? And I would argue that we are not. And it costs at an enormous cost to our society. One analogy is that when you walk into a bathroom and you see that a tub is overflowing, you have some options. You can either turn off the spigot and stop the water from coming in, or you can pull the plug. Can you do both at the same time? Probably not. And in the sentencing world, we think that you need to turn off the spigot. You need to look at front-end reforms. And that means getting rid of mandatory minimums. And if we're not there yet, though I think we should be, if we're not there yet, we can take steps to achieve at least intermediate goals. And I think that we do have some consensus around that. And that means expanding the safety valve. And what that is giving a judge the ability to look at the characteristics of the offender in front of him and the offense that was committed and that person's role in the offense in some ways. Right now, we're saying to the government, you can set the sentence without knowing anything about the offender. And we don't think that's right. Right now, we're throwing people who are nonviolent first-time offenders, and the majority of people right now in prison are nonviolent offenders in prison, and we're saying you can have 20 and 30-year-long sentences without actually questioning why they're there and whether or not rehabilitation is part of our goal as a society, a successful reentry. We might want to look at community-based programs. We might want to increase access to residential drug treatment programs. We want to look at mental health treatment. There are things we can do to make the criminal justice system work better. And finally, we can look at the system itself. Are the sentences appropriate? Do we need these long sentences? When we talk about years, it's so easy to say 5 or 10 years without meaning something. It's something we've become accustomed to. But 5 years means, for some of these families, the birth of children. It means the death of parents. It means life going on. And we've become, in some ways, insensitive to what time means. And I think we can do better, and we can do better and make our programs smarter. We can spend our money better. And I think at the end result is we'll have a criminal justice system we can all believe in.
The death penalty is sort of the ultimate sanction in the criminal justice system. And I think that whether you agree or disagree about its use, I think everyone can agree that there's no room for error. We cannot allow innocent people to be executed. There have been multiple studies done over the years that have demonstrated that there is a racial disparity in who faces the death penalty, both those defendants, the race of defendants and the race of victims. In addition, there's concern about sort of the economic disparity. When you're talking about people who do not have the means to provide their own representation, you're introducing them into an indigent defense system that you need to make sure has the resources to fully investigate the defendant's background, both with regard to the particular crime that they're accused of and their background to provide what's called mitigating evidence concerning their mental health, their upbringing, any abuse that they may have suffered, and various other things. And the resources right now just are not there to accomplish those goals. Defendants who are convicted and sentenced to death need to be given a fair opportunity to appeal those convictions and to have a full hearing of their constitutional rights. The availability of federal courts to review claims of innocence is particularly important. However, there have been restrictions placed on defendants that limit their time, even if evidence is discovered after that time period has elapsed. Those defendants facing the death penalty are barred from federal court, and that's a problem because regardless of whether we want procedural finality, the risk of executing an innocent person is just unacceptable. There has been movement at the state level regarding the death penalty. There have been several states that have taken up repeal, eliminating the death penalty in those states, and other states that have considered reforms to limit the extent to which the death penalty is utilized. That certainly demonstrates that there is an ongoing dialogue about the appropriate use for the death penalty in this country. There are signs that the Department of Justice may be considering a further review of the federal death penalty, the way it's applied, and whether or not there are racial disparities in those cases. And that is certainly a hopeful sign.